I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from emergency surgery when my wife walked in with her lawyer and divorce papers. But this story actually starts 6 months earlier when I noticed Madison's gym bag smelled like men's cologne. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 10, and I genuinely believed we had built something solid. I'm a custom furniture maker, run my own shop, make decent money, but nothing crazy. We lived in a nice 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, drove reliable cars, took one vacation a year, the normal middle-class American life. Madison worked as a marketing manager at a tech startup downtown, made good money herself. We split bills fairly, no kids yet, but we talked about it. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. The cologne thing happened on a Tuesday. She came home late from the gym, around 9 p.m., said the yoga class ran long. But when she dropped her bag by the door, I caught this sharp smell of expensive men's cologne, not the cheap stuff, something designer. I didn't say anything that night because I thought maybe I was crazy. Maybe someone at the gym just wore too much cologne and it got on her stuff. But then it happened again the next week and the week after that. Around the same time, I noticed other changes. Madison started leaving for the gym at 5:30 a.m. instead of her usual 7 a.m. She said she wanted to beat the morning crowd, but our gym was never that packed. She started dressing differently too, buying these expensive designer workout clothes from brands I'd never heard of, Lululemon and Alo Yoga and stuff that cost like $200 for a pair of leggings. When I asked about it, she said she got a bonus at work and wanted to treat herself. Fair enough, I thought. She works hard, she deserves nice things. Then came the late nights at the office. Madison's job had always been demanding, but suddenly she was staying until 8 or 9 p.m. multiple times a week, sometimes not getting home until after 10. She said they were working on a huge product launch and everyone was putting in overtime. I believed her because I had no reason not to. We'd been together a decade, and she'd never given me a reason to doubt her. But then I noticed her phone habits changed. She used to leave her phone on the kitchen counter when she showered or went to bed, but now she took it everywhere, even to the bathroom. She changed her passcode too. I only knew because one morning her phone was sitting on the nightstand, and I went to check the weather on it like I'd done 100 times before, and the code didn't work. When I asked her about it later, she said her work made everyone update their security settings because of some data breach. Again, sounded reasonable. The money thing started getting weird in February. We had a joint checking account for household expenses and separate accounts for our personal spending. I noticed our joint account was running lower than usual, even though we hadn't bought anything major. When I looked at the statements, I saw cash withdrawals, like $500 here, $800 there, sometimes $1,000 at a time. Over 2 months, Madison had pulled out almost $12,000 in cash. I asked her about it one night over dinner, tried to keep it casual, and she got defensive immediately. She said she was buying gifts for her mom's birthday and didn't want it showing up on the credit card statement where her mom might see it because they shared an Amazon account or something. It was a weird explanation, but I didn't push because I didn't want to seem like I was interrogating her. But the withdrawals kept happening. By March, she'd pulled out over $25,000. That's when I started getting seriously worried because that's not gift money. That's something else entirely. The breaking point came on a Saturday in early April. Madison said she was going to a work conference in Chicago for the weekend, left Friday morning, said she'd be back Sunday night. Sunday afternoon, I was cleaning the bedroom and knocked her laptop off the nightstand by accident. The screen turned on and I saw she was still logged into iCloud on the browser. I know I shouldn't have looked, but at this point my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I opened her messages and my stomach just dropped. Hundreds of messages with someone named Blake, going back almost 7 months. The messages were explicit, talking about their future together, making plans to leave their spouses, talking about trips they'd taken, hotels they'd stayed at. And there were photos, lots of photos I'm not going to describe, but you can imagine. I sat there on the bedroom floor reading through months of lies, and I felt like I was going to throw up. The worst part was reading her talk about me to him. She called me boring, said I had no ambition, said she felt trapped in a middle-class life with no excitement, said she deserved better. Meanwhile, Blake was apparently some hotshot sales director at a medical device company, married with 2 kids, telling Madison he'd leave his wife Jessica as soon as the timing was right. I took screenshots of everything, hundreds of messages, sent them to my email, then I started digging deeper. I found bank statements in her email for an account I didn't know existed, a joint account with Blake's name on it. And they'd been putting money into it for months, $43,600 total. Money she'd been stealing from our joint account, and money he'd apparently been hiding from his wife. They were building an escape fund. I sat there until midnight going through everything, documenting it all, And when Madison got home Sunday night acting like everything was normal, I didn't say a word. I just smiled and asked how the conference was. She said it was great, very productive, and I nodded and went to bed. Monday morning, I called a divorce attorney. The divorce attorney I hired was named Rebecca, and she was exactly what I needed: sharp, experienced, and she'd handled cases like mine before. I met with her that Monday afternoon and laid out everything I had: the screenshots, the bank statements, the secret account with Blake, all of it. Rebecca looked through the evidence for about 20 minutes without saying a word, and then she looked up at me and said this was one of the most clear-cut cases of financial infidelity and marital misconduct she'd seen in years. She told me not to confront Madison yet, not to let on that I knew anything, because we needed to get our ducks in a row first. She filed for a temporary restraining order on the joint account so Madison couldn't drain it, started preparing divorce papers, and told me to keep living like normal for another few weeks while we built the case. Those weeks were the hardest of my life because I had to go home every night and pretend everything was fine while my wife kissed me goodbye in the morning and went to meet her boyfriend. Then in late April, something unexpected happened that changed everything. My Uncle Richard died. I hadn't seen Uncle Richard in probably 5 years because he lived in Montana and we weren't particularly close, but he was my dad's older brother and he'd never married or had kids. I flew out to Montana for the funeral, told Madison I'd be gone for 3 days, and honestly I was glad for the break from pretending. The funeral was small, maybe 20 people, mostly distant relatives and some of his friends from the ranch he owned. After the service, his lawyer asked me to stay behind because Uncle Richard had left me something in his will. I figured maybe it was his truck or some tools or something sentimental. The lawyer took me to his office the next day and told me that Uncle Richard had been an extremely successful commodities trader before he retired to Montana, that he'd invested very wisely over 40 years, and that he'd left his entire estate to me because I was his only nephew, and he'd always liked that I worked with my hands and built things. The estate was worth $47 million. I literally thought the lawyer was joking at first. I asked him to repeat the number, and he said it again: $47 million in stocks, bonds, real estate, and cash. He handed me a stack of documents and explained that it would take a few months to fully process the estate through probate, but the will was ironclad, and I was the sole beneficiary. I sat in that office for probably an hour just trying to process what had happened. I'd gone from thinking I was getting a pickup truck to finding out I was worth more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. I flew back home in a daze and didn't tell Madison anything because by this point I knew we were getting divorced, and Rebecca had already told me that anything I inherited would likely be considered separate property as long as Madison didn't know about it before the divorce was filed. So I kept my mouth shut. But here's where Madison made her first major mistake. Apparently, she'd been monitoring my iCloud account without my knowledge, probably had been for months, and she saw the email from Uncle Richard's lawyer about the estate. She saw the number, $47 million, and suddenly her whole plan changed. Up until this point, she'd been playing the long game with Blake, slowly building their escape fund, waiting for the right moment to leave. But now she saw an opportunity to take half of a massive fortune, and she moved fast. The problem was she moved too fast and too obviously, and it destroyed her entire strategy. 2 weeks after I got back from Montana, I had to have emergency gallbladder surgery. I'd been having pain for a few days, and one night it got so bad Madison drove me to the ER, and they said my gallbladder was infected and needed to come out immediately. They did the surgery that night, and I woke up the next morning in a hospital room feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Madison had gone home to get some sleep and said she'd be back in the morning. She showed up around 10 a.m., but she wasn't alone. She walked in with a man in a suit who introduced himself as her attorney, and she was carrying a folder. She didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't ask if I needed anything. She just pulled up a chair next to my hospital bed and opened the folder. Inside were divorce papers. She told me she wanted a divorce, that she'd been unhappy for years, that we'd grown apart, and that she thought it would be best if we ended things amicably. Then she slid the papers across the bedside table and told me to sign them. I was still groggy from the anesthesia and the painkillers, and I couldn't believe what was happening. I asked her why she was doing this now, why she couldn't wait until I was out of the hospital, and she said she wanted to get the process started as soon as possible so we could both move on with our lives. I looked at the papers and immediately saw what she was trying to do. She was asking for 50% of all marital assets, including any inheritances received during the marriage. She knew about Uncle Richard's $47 million, and she was trying to claim half of it. Her attorney stood there with his arms crossed, looking very pleased with himself, and Madison had this expression on her face like she'd already won. I was lying there in a hospital bed 12 hours after surgery, and my wife was trying to strong-arm me into signing away $23 million. I told her I needed to read through the papers more carefully, and she got annoyed. She said there was nothing to read. Everything was straightforward, and the sooner I signed, the sooner we could both move forward. I told her I wasn't signing anything without talking to my own attorney first, and she got visibly angry. She said I was being difficult and that she was trying to make this easy for both of us. Her attorney finally stepped in and said they'd give me 24 hours to review the documents, and they'd be back tomorrow for my signature. Then they left. They literally just walked out of my hospital room and left me there. I waited until they were gone, and then I called Rebecca. She was at the hospital within an hour, and when I showed her the papers, she actually smiled. She said Madison had just made the biggest mistake of her life because serving someone divorce papers while they're recovering from surgery in a hospital bed showed such obvious opportunism and bad faith that any judge would see right through it. Rebecca filed our counterpetition the next day, and we went to war. Madison had assumed she was playing chess while I was playing checkers, but she had no idea what was coming. The discovery phase was brutal for her because we had everything documented. Every text message with Blake, every dollar she'd stolen, every lie she'd told, and her attorney clearly hadn't done his homework because he seemed shocked when we submitted our evidence. We had bank statements showing the secret account with $43,600. We had messages where she and Blake explicitly discussed hiding money from their spouses. We had her own words calling me boring and saying she deserved my money, and we had proof that she'd been accessing my private accounts without permission. Rebecca also subpoenaed Blake's wife, Jessica, who turned out to be more than happy to cooperate because she discovered the affair around the same time I did and was filing for divorce too. The court hearing was scheduled for late September, almost 6 months after I'd first discovered the affair. Madison showed up looking like she was ready for a business meeting, professional suit, hair done, acting confident like she still thought she had a chance. Her attorney tried to paint her as a woman who'd been unhappily married for years and was simply trying to get her fair share after sacrificing her career to support her husband's business. It was complete fiction because Madison had never sacrificed anything for my furniture business and had actually mocked it multiple times in her messages to Blake. When it was our turn, Rebecca systematically destroyed every argument Madison's attorney made. She presented the text messages on a screen in the courtroom, and you could literally watch Madison's face go pale as her own words were read out loud. Rebecca showed the judge the secret bank account, showed the cash withdrawals from our joint account totaling over $30,000, showed messages where Madison told Blake she was going to take me for everything I had once she found out about the inheritance. Then Rebecca dropped the big one. She presented evidence that Madison had illegally accessed my iCloud account to monitor my private communications and financial information, which is a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. She also presented testimony from Uncle Richard's lawyer confirming that the inheritance was left solely to me and that Madison had no legal claim to it whatsoever because it was received after I'd already filed for divorce and was clearly separate property. The judge took about 15 minutes to review everything, and then he made his ruling. Madison got absolutely nothing. 0% of the inheritance. She was ordered to return the $43,600 she'd stolen. She was ordered to pay my legal fees, which were substantial, and the judge referred the case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges related to the identity theft and unauthorized computer access. Madison burst into tears right there in the courtroom, and her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. Blake was sitting in the back of the courtroom because he'd been subpoenaed to testify if needed, and I watched him put his head in his hands when the judge read the decision. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the court victory. Madison lost her job 2 weeks after the hearing because word got around her office about what happened, and the company decided someone with that kind of judgment problem wasn't fit for a leadership role. Blake lost his job too because his company had a strict ethics policy, and carrying on an affair with someone while helping them hide marital assets didn't look good for a sales director. Jessica took their house in her divorce and got primary custody of their 2 kids, and Blake ended up moving into a small apartment across town paying massive child support. Madison had to move back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent after returning the stolen money and paying my legal fees. Her friends stopped talking to her once they found out what she'd done, and her family was humiliated by the whole situation. She tried to reach out to me a few times after everything was final, sent emails apologizing and saying she'd made terrible mistakes and asking if we could talk. I blocked her on everything and never responded. Blake sent me a message on LinkedIn of all places saying I'd ruined 2 lives and that I should be ashamed of myself. I wrote back one time and told him that he and Madison had ruined their own lives by being selfish and dishonest, and that I'd simply refused to be a victim of their choices. Then I blocked him too. As for me, I sold the house because I didn't want to live there anymore with all those memories, and I bought a beautiful property outside the city with enough land for a much bigger workshop. I'm building custom furniture again, but now I can be selective about projects and only take on work I actually enjoy. I started dating someone new about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, a woman named Sarah who owns a bakery downtown, and things are going really well. I haven't told her about the inheritance yet because I want to make sure we're solid before bringing that kind of money into the conversation, but I'm getting there. My life is honestly better now than it ever was with Madison because I'm not living with someone who secretly hated me and was planning to betray me. Madison is still living with her parents as far as I know, working some entry-level marketing job, making a fraction of what she used to make, and dealing with the reputation she earned. Blake is apparently miserable in his tiny apartment, seeing his kids every other weekend and working a job he hates because nobody in his old industry will hire him. They thought they were so smart, thought they could steal from their spouses and ride off into the sunset together with a pile of money. But greed and betrayal have a way of destroying everything they touch. Madison assumed I was broke, assumed she could cheat and steal, and then take half of everything when it was convenient for her, but she gambled on the wrong person. She could have just asked for a divorce honestly, could have walked away with her dignity intact, but instead she chose to lie and scheme, and now she has nothing. Sometimes karma doesn't need any help, it just needs patience. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.